Last week, the Chiefs of Ontario announced it was launching a judicial review of the federal government's Greenhouse Gas and Pollution Pricing Act, more commonly known as the carbon tax. The organization says the tax unfairly targets First Nations people. Many of them still heat their homes with fossil fuels and experience higher rates of poverty. Joining us today to talk about this judicial review is Abram Benedict, Grand Chief of the Mohawk Council of Akwesasne. Grand Chief Benedict, thank you for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit about why the Chiefs of Ontario decided to launch this judicial review at this time?
Absolutely. So over the course of a couple of years, the Chiefs of Ontario has been at the table with either members from the Ministry of Finance or the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, trying to come up with some sort of regime or system that acknowledges the unique challenges created by communities, predominantly in the north and obviously within Ontario, with access issues and the cost of, the high exorbitant cost of access to, fuel and necessities. And thus far, over the last, couple of years that we've been chatting with them or have had meetings with them about this, they haven't brought anything substantive to the table. And unfortunately, we've now had to resort to the federal courts and ask for some assistance.
If nothing changes, how might the carbon tax negatively impact First Nations families, particularly those living in Northern Ontario?
Well, I want to be clear that the impact has been felt for some time now, and it's even prior to inflation being at all-time high. As you know, the carbon tax works under the Greenhouse Gas Pricing Act, and if the provinces don't have some sort of regime in place, then the carbon tax becomes the default. And so, since Ontario, about 4 years ago, or under 4 years ago, removed the cap and trade program that they have, that implemented the carbon tax being applied across the province of Ontario, which at that time obviously impacted our communities immensely. And we have seen, since the cost of living has gone extremely high to all-time records, it's creating a much more pressure on the communities. So we know at this time it's very difficult for communities to manage this, whether it be individual homeowners or communities as a whole. So there are a number of communities that have diesel power generated electricity for their community, and what is happening in those cases is that the carbon tax is being levied in community and costing an extreme amount of money to the community as a whole, which that money is definitely needed for other programs such as as healthcare or housing and other subsidies or supports to help with the rising costs.
And from what the COO is saying, it sounds like First Nations people living on reserve are not eligible for the same carbon tax rebates as other Canadians. Can you explain why this is?
Well, so we have been at the table with the federal government, and what they have only brought forward is basically the same thing that's available to all Canadians coast to coast, which is either a rebate or subsidy programs that are available. And what we have said to the federal government is that this regime or these rebates will not work for our communities in the north, simply because it's access issues. A number of people don't file income tax because it doesn't, either their income is on reserve, there's no sense in filing income tax, because income tax, the way it works in credits and rebates, is it offsets how much tax you pay in. When you pay no tax in, there's nothing to get back. The other thing is that many remote communities don't have access to tax preparers or H&R Block. So it makes no sense that our community should have to go through the same process any Canadian has to get some sort of relief around the carbon tax.
And finally, last week in the House of Commons, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre brought up the CO's judicial review as part of his party's calls to axe the carbon tax. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I want to make it clear that going to the federal courts was the last resort. I mean, we've been trying to raise this with the minister. We've also been trying to raise this with the prime minister, and there's been no traction. We've only had the bureaucrats at the table providing the same message that they have all along, that these are the subsidies, these are the rebates that are available, regardless of it's in community or not in community. So completely unacceptable. So by going to the federal courts, this is really our last resort, but we are looking to raise the profile on this. The door for negotiations still continues to be open, but what we need is the federal government to come to the table with something meaningful that's going to alleviate the pressures to our communities, and predominantly the communities in the north.
Well, we'll have to leave it there, but once again, thanks for joining us today, Grand Chief.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.